everyone see the screen?
Yep. I'm just laughing because that was pretty funny.
Thank you. All right. So technology did what we wanted today. So thank you all, by the way, for taking the time out to do it. Hopefully the snow hasn't kept you in too much today because it's still going here in Albany. And so essentially what I'd like to propose to do for my thesis is create essentially a directory of resources for veteran services in the state of New York. Right now, no such resource exists. From preliminary talking to people in the field, there have been several attempts to create sort of a consolidated directory of resources, but they've all failed. And so what I'd like to do is see if it's possible to essentially crowdsource an online veteran resource directory to help ideally improve and streamline veteran services throughout the state. So how would we do that, or how would I do that? So the first part would be creating a website. Essentially, the website would be broken down to regional economic development councils. So that would be things like New York City, Long Island, Mohawk Valley, Capital Region, North Country, Southern Tier, Central New York, Western New York. I think that's probably the best way to do it because the state of New York breaks down its resources by regional economic development councils rather than, say, counties or other geographic boundaries. And as someone who works at the New York State Division of Veterans Affairs, I'm in a much better position than previous people have been to create this resource. People have worked at other, what they call veteran service organizations. So ones you might be familiar with are like the American Legion or Veterans of Foreign Wars. But the New York State Division of Veterans Affairs is the state authority for all veteran service organizations that exist in the state of New York. And as a result, that allows a lot more authority in a lot of ways to grab information that these other stakeholders couldn't have before. And the reason that's important is because if a veteran walks into a veteran service organization in Buffalo, they're totally dependent upon that individual's ability and knowledge of resources in that area. And if that veteran says move to Syracuse, that veteran service officer in Buffalo might not have any idea about what goes on in Syracuse to help them get set up in terms of resources. But what this website would allow them to do is create something that's filtered by the state of New York, essentially, thoroughly vetted by other veteran service organizations and maintained by veterans and veteran service officers. And that way, there's confidence in that when they refer services over to a veteran who might move around or maybe has family somewhere else that needs the services, they can do so within the state of New York. And so essentially that would be utilizing feedback from these different veteran service officers and veteran service organizations. Oftentimes in veteran resources, we talk about that it's not a resource issue in terms of quantity, but a navigation issue. And that's really like the crux of what I'm trying to address here, is how do we navigate? Everyone wants to help a veteran. There's plenty of things that are like, we help veterans or we want to give this to veterans, but how do you wade through all that stuff to find sort of like little gold nuggets that are actually useful to people? Because there's a lot of fatigue from veterans who are just sick of services trying to take advantage of them so they get good press, essentially. And this would be a website that people could feel confident referring people to, and for veterans to feed information into it so it continues to sort of grow in this positive cycle. So yeah, it's essentially what I'd like to do. And I'd like to do that ideally through focus groups, gathering. We often have meetings with a lot of these veteran service organizations across the state. I have 8 of them lined up for March. Speaking to people at the different nonprofits and veteran service organizations to figure out what they saw as issues in the previous sort of iterations of this and how to avoid those pitfalls. And also getting the state invested in its creation and maintenance, which previously it has not been. And really, as far as I can tell, maintenance has been the biggest issue. Nobody wants, sure, you can collect all the resources, but no one wants to maintain it afterwards. No one wants to house it. So those are some of the issues that I would be addressing in the creation of this tool and research.
Okay. Could you explain again, Shannon, how you want, how do you want to use crowdsourcing exactly? Is this something that the website would capture in terms of, what help they've gotten in the past?
Right. So ideally, there would be some sort of contact form on the website that would allow organizations or veterans themselves or nonprofits that would send an email directly to me or at the agency that could address like, hey, there's this resource that we know about here in Central New York that's specifically for Central New York veterans, let's just say. And it's a really great organization. And if we've worked with them before and if they've been vetted by other organizations, that would be one way of gaining sort of new information. So sort of creating this community of stakeholders that are invested in giving us new information and maintaining the information. And sort of just like crowdsourcing that information, for lack of a better term to put it, but that's how I was sort of thinking about it.
So when they fill out this form, it would be available to VA officers around the state. Is that the idea? So they could.
That's correct.
They could give you feedback, and how would that work once it's posted? Is it sort of like a forum where they're hearing back, but it's just one-on-one, one on many, or is it something else?
Well, I think at least in the creation of it, what it could be are essentially Google groups, where people can share their information, and then other officers can give feedback regarding it, and sort of a lot of testing and going through it just to make sure that these organizations are legitimate, and what people's experience has been with it. And a lot of this whole business is really who people know. So creating those contacts and such, and giving them a forum to do that in, as you said.
And really what you're doing is sort of a pilot. You just want to see what works at this stage.
Yeah.
You're not really sure exactly, one idea is the Google groups, and maybe that's what you'll propose, but you may end up in a different area completely, depending on what other people can tell you, I guess, what these focus groups.
It's true, yeah, because the groups that we sort of have lined up in like late February, March are really getting a lot of these stakeholders together and talking about, what are the services that they find useful and helpful, and introducing this idea to them really, and getting their feedback on what they think is good information to put out there.
Okay. So what you're doing is really the collection at this stage, sort of seeing what's out there and what the possibilities are. And that's important as far as we're concerned. So you don't even have to set up the site itself, I don't think. You're just...
I already have it set up, if that helps.
Well, you have a potential site. I guess the focus groups will determine a little bit about what. So, okay, you've got a start, and then you're going to talk to these people, and then you may make it interactive, and so get their feedback once you come up with ideas.
Absolutely.
Steve, what do you think?
I didn't have the benefit of reading any of the other materials, so Shannon, you might have discussed this. What's the closest thing that's like this that currently exists?
The closest thing that's like this that currently exists would probably be the federal VA's website. So when you go into the federal VA's website, you can select the state that the veteran is in, and it will give you something like the name of the state veterans organization. So every state has a version of the New York State Division of Veterans Affairs. It'll tell you where the nearest VA facilities are, whether that's health facilities or benefit facilities or cemeteries, because those are the three parts of it. And it'll probably tell you the contact information for the New York State chapter of like the American Legion and the VFW. But that would probably be about it. It wouldn't tell you about a lot of the nonprofits that exist or where those local chapters are within the state itself. How
do you think resources get listed on that site?
essentially, from having played around with it and having veterans be very, very upset about having to use it, they essentially just click the state that they're in, and then it's just a list of links.
I'm sorry, I think I asked the wrong question. How do things get listed there? How do they get onto the site?
Oh, I'm not particularly sure how, but it's a very limited amount. It's essentially anything that's accredited through the VA itself has to be there. So the VA, the federal VA, is an accrediting agency. So you have to be accredited to be a veteran service organization. So they're not going to list anything else that isn't accredited by them.
And would you follow those same rules, or are you going to develop new policies?
I would like to develop new policies, because while that is useful for veteran service organizations, it's not particularly useful for nonprofits that don't need accreditation. So if you want to offer housing advice to a veteran, you don't need to be accredited through the VA, but that's still an important resource for a veteran to have. So I think in terms of listing veteran service organizations, yes. In terms of nonprofits who have specialties, probably not.
So what kind of policy would you use to identify things that are appropriate to have listed and things that are not? Is that like judgment, or?
Well, one I think is a basis of those forums is to find out who have veteran service organizations used that have come up with real solutions and have actually helped veterans in experience. Two is asking veterans themselves about organizations they've worked with that have produced positive results. Something more objective than that would be like something like GuideStar or Charity Navigator, about organizations that rank high on transparency. So I think a conglomeration of those would probably be the best way, because it's really, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain it, but it really is a group of people, when you're talking about veterans, who have a severe distrust of anything government oriented. And so everything is really a word of mouth kind of community. And so I would utilize that.
Yeah. I'm just asking a set of questions to get you to think about some things.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. Are there other domains, non-veterans, that might be similar, that could serve as a model for you to follow? Community mental health resources, housing resources, how to buy a car resources.
How to buy a car, yeah. I'm trying to think. I can't say I've really navigated to a whole lot of those sites, but it's a pretty good idea for thinking about it. I'm just trying to think about it in terms of a government organization hosting something like this. And
I was getting there.
Yeah. Okay.
I was getting there because, Amy, you operate under, so I think it would be helpful to situate this in the literature about community-based web resources.
Okay.
I mean, this is not something that you've invented.
Oh, no.
It's been happening for, I don't know, 25 years. Or 20 years or 15 or 10, depending on what you want to talk about. So there's lots of models to look at, and it would be interesting to try and see are there different kinds of models, or some of them more open than others, or some more restrictive, so you might be able to look at, and so I'd encourage you to find 3 or 4 or 10 different models and then kind of rate them as like openness,
right.
Who gets to write? Is it a direct feed from the submitters, or is there an editorial process? So you want to, situate it in something so that you're not reinventing the wheel.
Sure.
Are you talking about?
While you're talking about that, Steve, the thing that I would say that's relative to that is Dr. Stam has worked with a lot of community organizations in setting up websites, and I think she's got a pretty long history of what that's like and what she's gone through. And she might have some good ideas because she's also good with focus groups. I mean, that's her focus is,
right.
Is ethnographic study and the research methods. So she could help you there as well. But I know she's worked a lot on designing websites for community service organizations, particularly refugee, but
right.
she's done others as well. So
yeah, definitely.
yeah, she might have at least some thoughts in terms of your methodology, how you go about it, what sort of questions you want to ask your focus groups, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm her GA, so that'll work out pretty well for me.
Could you go to the previous slide?
Sure.
So, excuse me 1 second.
Yeah, and I think also, I know, she's sort of spotty on the time she can come to these sessions, but I know she'd be interested in that.
Yeah.
I was also thinking, why do you think past efforts have failed? I mean, you mentioned that.
Yeah, I'm part of it, at least from these preliminary talks that I've had, have just been like, nobody wants to maintain it. Everybody will create it, and then they won't maintain it because people just get busy or this or that. And then the other issue is the other organizations really don't have the title or authority to command other organizations to give them information. Whereas if you're functioning within the state agency, they are the licensing authority for the state of New York. So if I make a request that says to like a local post in Canandaigua, New York, that says, hey, I need your information. Who are the people that you deal with in regards to housing? They're much more likely to respond to me than they are some little nonprofit they've probably never heard of before. And so I think that authority and I think the ability and resources to maintain a resource like this are probably two of the big reasons why it's failed before. But I'm hoping that given these particular circumstances, it would not fail this time.
Okay. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had to take that call. And then on your next slide, so I just wanted to see how this question related to the next set of questions. Are you planning to actually build the website, or you want to develop a document, work plan, concept piece that might be used at your agency that they might then implement?
I know I had all intentions of building out the website.
Because that to me seems like they're two separate projects.
Mm-hmm.
There's one that talks about how it would work, how you'd build it, how you'd get data, how you'd maintain it, what the policies would be, what the design would be, how it would fit into your existing structure. That's like something you might hire a consulting firm to do, your agency, or maybe do it yourself
Right.
and act as a consultant. And then once you have that, you then might turn around and build it.
Okay.
So, and my next question was, when you plan to build this, do you actually plan to put it online?
Yes.
So then that involves you in a whole different level. I mean, like under the states as a private citizen or as a state employee?
Well, right now the discussions are for me to build out like a beta version, essentially, as a private citizen, and then if the state sees potential in it, for it to become a state website.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this before, but you may want to think of just the focus groups in the initial paper. In part because you're going to have to get a lot of approvals, even for it to go through its first stage. I mean, you might want to have something that's a mock-up, a very rough mock-up, just so people can be talking about it and giving you something to bounce off of. But you want to put in a definite line. And one thing I know about websites is they really can drag on for a long time. And I don't want you to get hung up regarding the thesis.
And the other thing I encourage you to think about is to discard the term website.
Okay.
Which is, a nice 1990s era term. And think of it as an app that is going to be accessible to people on a variety of devices, including laptops and phones. And so what that does, though, is it puts your mind sort of in a different place. You're might still be using HTML5.
Right.
But building something that's self-contained and it forces you into imagining it, hitting the phone, the tablet, the laptop, the billboard.
Got it.
Which is a good thing. I mean, it should do that. New York State and other states shouldn't be building websites anymore. They should be building apps, essentially.
Right.
So, and that also opens you to using a prototype, an app prototype, to build out some prototypes, which might be interesting and fun. And then the third thing, and I'm going to, I don't know if that's three, but another thing is to think about it. Russ mentioned a form, but when I was hearing in your presentation, you said people were going to send you this data as an email. Did I misunderstand that?
Well, it depends how tech savvy the person on the other end is, really, how that information is going to get to me.
Yeah. I mean, do you imagine that there's going to be, would you say 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, or 1,000,000 entries that this app is going to reference?
I would say probably in the hundreds of entries.
Hundreds?
Yeah.
You probably don't want to do that by email.
Oh, no, I don't. I don't. But well, I'm confident in some people's abilities to use a form or a group or something like that.
A form.
Other people.
Groups are email. Groups are, I mean, they require you to go in and pull out objects.
Right. But while I have confidence in some people's ability to do that, not so much in some other people's ability. So it's going to have to be more fluid in that regard.
Okay.
But I understand the point that you're making in terms of like not wanting 500 emails currently happening.
Well, you can't process them, and you can't turn that over to somebody else, and they belong to you. Right. They don't belong to the project, and you can't share them, and you can't delegate. You know, there's just so many problems with that. So,
right.
Yeah, I think this sounds really cool. And by the way, if it's at all interesting, you could certainly prototype this whole thing as a TiddlyWiki and double down in your 575 class.
Got it.
It could certainly, because you know, you might not ever want to produce it that way, but prototyping, you kind of get it. You get to it pretty quickly. I hope you see that by now.
Yeah, no, I could see it with the tagging and sort of all of the other tiddlers that can drop down from it and creating the links.
It's pretty much exactly what you're talking about. Potentially, yeah. The way that I display student submissions, I mean, that's just running through a script. You submit a form and boom, it shows up. That's not bad.
No, it's not.
You know,
it's actually a pretty good idea. I hadn't thought of it that way.
And we haven't really gotten in the class to showing you how that actually happens, but it's relatively straightforward to ingest a spreadsheet. So if you can put stuff in and if you have existing resources that you can put in a spreadsheet, boom, then we've got 200 of them right there that you could work with. Right. You know, and the idea of tagging and creating a resource that's navigable by the users in a way that's comfortable and useful for them. Right. It's kind of what you're thinking about, and that would push you. At least that would allow you to address for that class some of the the thinking through how people navigate through complex information spaces, and it might help you sort of organize your thoughts for your thesis, whether or not you use the TiddlyWiki as a final thesis product, or you just use your thinking and then you generate some HTML in a prototype or something. But I just encourage you to think through that, because you're kind of doing all the work, on the left hand. You might as well have the right hand benefit from it.
Gotcha. No, absolutely. Absolutely.
And part of what you're doing is deciding these sorts of issues. I mean, that's part of the thesis is if you come up with a method, you want to explain why and why you think it's a good idea. So, that's part of your process. The methodology is a critical part, and there may be some struggle with that or whatever until you come to terms with it, and that's okay. That's what, maybe the focus groups will help with. But you mentioned Dr. Lizardi. I was just wondering why you listed him. Is there an area you think he's strong in that might work?
For some of the newer organizations and some of the younger veterans, I like the idea of using social media in terms of gathering some of the information and creating a conversation. And I know, like I mentioned, Lizardi's social media class right now, and I just thought he would be a good resource for how to properly tap into creating that conversation in that way.
Okay, that's
but I like
important.
But I like the idea of Professor Stam too, with her for focused research on apps, not websites.
Right.
You know, and the creation of those.
Catherine's websites tend not to be resource based. I don't know that you've worked with any organizations that manage a complex resource database that you're talking about. She tends to do more flat for organizations, I think. I might be wrong about that, but I don't recall seeing sort of, yours is a data-driven website.
Right.
I keep calling it, yours is a data-driven app.
Yeah, I would consider Dr. Stan more of a sort of a resource, you know, just ask what her experience has been, how, you know, where have there been hang-ups, what's worked well, what hasn't. But I do think the social media for developing your ideas is a good idea as well. And the other thing is, you know, to always be sort of evolving on this thing until and that could be largely what the thesis is about, you know, to capture that, what you're going through and thinking about it.
Are you completing this by May? Is that your goal?
That's my goal.
Yeah, so the idea is to tighten it as much as you can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's doable. You don't want to have to do everything, because once you get into VA, they're going to start holding you up, and you don't want that. So just, you know, it's just the way bureaucracy works. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you really want to make sure what you can do, you're free to do until for the thesis, and then you can go from there in terms of, you know, getting approvals, that sort of thing.
Sure.
Yeah, I just add a cautionary that I give to every student who talks about doing a work-related thesis is just make sure that your workplace doesn't control your scholarship, your academic work. That if your workplace says, "Oh no, we don't want you working on that," or "We're going to promote you to the director's job," or whatever it is, you know, something changes in your workplace tomorrow that you have no control over. Maybe you do have some control over it, but whatever, you're no longer tasked with this. You don't want your thesis to go away. So you have to keep, and you don't want someone at work to have to approve something that you need to do.
Oh yeah, no, they're not
So
gonna. No, we're good on that front.
Yeah, it's and then especially working with a state agency, there's a lot of confidentiality rules. There's workplace work product and stuff like that. So you want to make sure that whatever you're taking from work is public.
Yeah, well, the general counsel's working with me on that for the agency, so.
Okay, but and that what that right there says to me is like that's like a little bit of a red flag, because if you're already having to work with the general counsel, then you're going to be in a situation where you're waiting for the general counsel to give approval for you to use data that you need, and in the meantime you have to hand it in. So just you know, work. Just be careful. It's just a cautionary. I've seen it work lots and lots and lots of times, and it almost always does, but doesn't, you know.
Sure.
I have also seen it just blow up on somebody at the last minute. And you say general counsel, and that makes me really nervous.
Don't worry about him. He's fine.
Well,
yes,
you know,
I actually have to go, but Russ, I'll be back for your 7:15.
Well, Shannon's here now, actually. You have to go. Shannon, do you need to wait until 7:15 or?
I thought mine was next week.
Okay. Anyway, but I will be back. You've got a next one on the schedule for 7:15, I think, right?
Yeah, I've got Shannon Tooley. Is that who's here? Or there's two Shannons. Hang on a second.
Howdy.
There's many Shannons.